Hi, welcome to the Voices on the Edge of Change. I'm here today with Petra Abbam from the BBC, who is Head of Governance for AI and all things AI. And apart from being a friend and an ex-colleague, is so wise. So we are going to hear all about how she feels about the responsibility and the governance that we need to wrap around our culture for AI. So let's jump straight in and hear what she had to say. Welcome, Petra. Absolutely thrilled to have you here.
Thanks, Lou. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Not at all. I guess we should disclose that we have worked together before.
Yeah, okay.
A bit.
That's trust.
That's trust,
That's
isn't
transparency.
it? Is that where we're going?
Yeah,
of course we are. No, absolutely wonderful. And I will start by saying how lucky I have been, actually, to know you and to work with you. And I know that I came knocking on your door way back when I was setting out with Susan Lavelle about what we thought the culture should be across the BBC. And I know because we've had this conversation that you were quite struck that we were concerned about culture and about how the work that you were doing across the BBC and how that was going to play into the culture that we were going to roll out actually across the BBC. And I think you and I even had a coffee one time where you were saying to me something along, and I won't quote you particularly because I can't remember the exact words, but something along the lines of I'm quite surprised that you want to sit down and talk to me about this. Like, I didn't think anyone would think that it would be a thing to talk about culture.
Yeah.
So you were quite struck by that, weren't you?
Yeah, I think, I think the work that you guys have done with culture change has been really impressive. But I think when I came into kind of the responsible AI team, and it was a new team to the BBC, and and sort of culture and AI was very new, and just sort of speaking to you and how engaged you were and wanting to sort of embed sort of like culture change into like the AI space it was really kind of refreshing. And, that you were in that same space and that you felt it was important in a way that not all parts of the organization did. So that was, and so you were like an invaluable sort of help, like at the beginning of our journey.
Oh, that's really kind. I mean, I think that was born out of curiosity. I'm a generally very curious person. I think some people used to call me nosy.
Me too.
Nosy, curious, not sure, could be both. But yes, I mean, I think for me, the whole thing around AI, we were probably, I know this is a Women in Change podcast, but I will declare that having spent 25 years at the BBC, it's quite hard to lose that part of me.
Yeah.
But culture was inherent and important to what we did. The values were incredibly important. And when we looked and talked about the values that the BBC upholds and really holds dear, trust is one, impartiality is the other. And for me, looking at the, whether you call them the pitfalls or the concerns or the dangers of AI, and I know I did a podcast at the BBC with a few of your colleagues called The Good, the Bad and the Ugly of AI. What was that sense of, and there's some really phenomenal things about AI, right? So we've had a conversation before we come on air today about how it can be your friend, and if you're lonely, it can talk to you. We've talked about I'm dyslexic and I don't have a VA or a PA or whatever anyone else knows them as, or an executive assistant. So the fact that it can check my spelling and my grammar and make me sound amazing on my emails is just incredible. So it's got some really great things, but also there's dangers, and as we start to learn about some of those, the responsibility for the way we see AI and how we use AI couldn't, for me, be any more important. So it was an absolute delight to find you in the BBC and to hear how important it is for you to build a culture of responsibility. So before we get into that, which is going to be fascinating, how on earth do you get into the job that you're in? Because nobody knew that job was going to exist a few years ago. So how do you do that?
I didn't know that job was going to exist a few years ago. I wanted that job to exist, but it was a it was a roundabout process. I think I mean, initially back in the day, I started off as a computer scientist, but then I did many different things. As you said earlier, nosiness, curiosity, that's kind of what drives me. There's so many things. I'm fascinated in lots of different things. And for me, I think, and I felt like I always used to think of that as an issue because I felt like I would stay in one, I wouldn't change jobs, I would change careers. So I've had lots of different careers. And I always felt like, oh God, all of my friends and, colleagues, they know what they want to do. Whereas, I don't even have a 1 year or 3 year plan, let alone a 5 year or 10 year. And so I would, I've sort of run Formula One websites. I've been in ad sales. I've run a romance bookstore. I've been in publishing. I've done many different things.
How lovely.
Then I came into the BBC to do publishing, and then I think I did a fellowship about 6 years ago with the BBC, a Clore Leadership Fellowship, and it's part of it's leadership in the arts, and it's a 1 year program. There's about 20 something fellows that are chosen around the UK, and the BBC sponsored 2 positions, and I got one of them. And it was basically you could spend a year investigating and developing your leadership in the arts on any sort of topic that you wanted. And at the beginning, I didn't know what that was for me. I didn't know kind of, because for me, my main driver was curiosity.
Yeah.
And I'd never really thought about what my values were, what really drove me. And that year was just absolutely transformational. Like absolutely transformational. I remember like at the beginning, you go off on a 2-week retreat with all of us and in the middle of nowhere. And we had like on the first session, we had a session where they basically, within a day, they said to everyone, tell me what you think that person's value is. And I'd never met these people before. This is the first time we've ever met. And this is like less than 24 hours. And everyone said that they thought that mine was obviously social justice. And nobody had ever said that. And I'd never really articulated it to myself. And I was like, it's so obvious, but it was so obvious to me, I'd never actually thought that. And so what ended up happening was that year for me ended up being all about what does equality, inclusion, fairness look like in a digital society. And that led me into things like ethical algorithms, bias in AI and machine learning and, human rights. And I was going to conferences. I was in like think tanks. I worked at a think tank and a placement for a few months and stuff, looking at the social harms of the harms of social media and things like that. So that was just like, I was like, this is what I want to do. I love technology. I'm so interested in technology, but it's social justice is so important to me. And I want to combine those two things. Came back into the BBC and I was buzzing and I was like, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to do. But it was early in that. There was like a couple of people here and there that were looking at that, but there was nothing, concrete. There was nothing structured in the BBC. And I suppose I let it go.
Did you craft that job for yourself, really? Is that how that sort of works?
Well, about a year ago, I thought, I thought I can't, about a year and a half ago, I thought I can't let this happen anymore. And then I went and spoke to a few people and I was told that, and I heard that they were going to create a team around this. And I basically got in there and I was just like, look, this is what I want to do. This is my skill set. This is how I can help. And the job came out of that.
Because I just remember sitting in a meeting one day where somebody said to me, have you met Petra? She's so clever. She's got it all sewn up. Like, you got to go talk to her about AI. I just love the way she speaks about AI. So that was coming out in meetings before I met you. You probably didn't know that, but that was certainly how I came to know of you. Because I think you were working for Yazir at the time. As the Chief People Officer for the BBC.
Yeah,
I was
executive lead.
Executive lead. So quite a shift from sort of supporting his work into looking at the responsibility of AI. That's another gear change. And what's fascinating about these podcasts, because we're now on to our fourth, is that nearly everyone that's come on this podcast, in fact, I think everyone today, actually, I can say, has talked about squiggly careers. And none of us, and I say this because if I showed you my roadmap from where I started to where I am sitting in front of you now, there's no definition around that being the right way to have a career. It's not a wrong way, but you wouldn't have mapped that, right? And I guess for me, 25 years at the Beeb, really, I have to thank them for the fact that I didn't actually have to have a set road and that I could go about. And I think what's lovely to hear from you, actually, credit to the Beeb on this one, is the fact that you can go in as one thing, end up something else, and come out as something completely different, you know. And I think that's there aren't many organizations that actually offer you that squiggly career, is there really?
I've left a lot of organizations because they don't. And I wouldn't have. I've been at the BBC for 8.5 years, and I wouldn't have been here that long if I was. I mean, I think I'm on my 6th role.
Right. Yeah.
Like a very different role at the BBC from 8.5 years, and I wouldn't be there if the BBC didn't offer me those opportunities.
Well, that's wonderful, and I know that you and I have done some terrific work together. But for the sake of our listeners, I'd really like to get into the world of AI, because some might say AI's been around for years, you know, like, why are we suddenly talking about it? You've actually had AI in things like Google, or what we might know as Bing now, or any of those things. And it's been silently there. And I can remember quite a while back trying to write a eulogy, I think it was, and it says, do you want some help with this? And I was thinking, where's that come from?
Yeah.
And obviously that's all the undertones of AI.
Yep.
So it's been around a long time, but suddenly it's a topic in a way that it's never been a hot topic like it is now.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
I think there's two things. So one thing is, I think it has been a hot topic, but people didn't necessarily know they were talking about AI.
Okay.
So
say a bit more about that.
So, for example, you know, social media. You know, people are talking about social media. People are talking about things like fear of missing out. People are talking about, you know, things like the harms of basically like online harassment and all those kind of things.
Right.
That's all driven by AI. You know, all of the social media, like Facebook, Instagram, you know, all of those things, what you see, what's recommended to you, who you follow, that's all driven by AI.
Right.
So all of those sort of, you know, things like echo chambers, that's created by AI because it recommends what you see and all those things. So all of those things that we have been talking about quite a lot in the last sort of 10, 15 years, you know, we just didn't sort of necessarily automatically assign them to AI, but they are all created by AI.
Right.
So we were discussing the result of AI. So November 2022, that changed everything when ChatGPT was launched.
Right.
So ChatGPT is basically it's a game changer.
Yeah.
Within a I think a month, 1 million people were using it. Within 2 months, 100 million, and that's like exponential. Like that adoption compared to anything that's gone before is just
Well, as a change manager for the last 20 years of my life, can I tell you those figures are astonishing? Right? Because I can get people to move over from Television Centre to West One without dragging half a dozen people at least. So, I mean, that adoption rate is huge. And that, I mean, I know we've always joked about it in terms of an iPhone. You know, how many people do you see queuing around Apple when the new iPhone comes out? But that is an astonishing, just say that number again.
100 million in 2 months.
100 million in 2 months of adoption of ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Right. And excuse my ignorance, and for the sake of maybe a listener who might want to ask the same question, ChatGPT is its own brand, is it owned by Google?
It's owned by OpenAI, and so they started off, they're a non-profit.
Right.
And they're basically like their aim is artificial general intelligence.
Right.
So when basically machines can do what humans can do. And that's their goal. That's what they're trying to do. And they're sort of, you know, doing a countdown, and they're working towards it step by step. So they, you know, their end goal is organizational AI, where a machine can do everything that anyone in an organization can do without any human oversight. So, and yeah, that's what their sort of goal is for. And so OpenAI, so they have tools like ChatGPT. That's a big one that most people know about. They've got DALL-E, which is their sort of image tool, and they're doing a lot of work in this space. But there's lots of other organizations that are doing this as well. But they were the ones that kind of came out and like really high publicized with ChatGPT, and that just changed everything because overnight. I think in the sort of AI space, it was mostly the people that used AI sort of knowingly. They were specialists. They were data scientists. They were developers. They were, in a specific sphere. You needed to be able to code to use AI.
Yeah.
Whereas I remember seeing a Twitter post that said the most common language now is the best programming language now is English. Or Chinese, Mandarin, or French, or whatever. You just need natural language. Because with these tools, you just need to say to ChatGPT, I want to do this. You can just have a conversation with it.
Honestly, I mean, I've only been working for myself since I left you all, which, I'm still suffering grief. But I've been working on my own solitary, really, for somebody who actually loves to be with people. That's a whole other podcast, by the way. But the fact that I can feel very confident about building a business, whether it's Women in Change, whatever it is now, and know that I don't actually need to buy in resource to help me just to get my pitches out or whatever it is. And there's a downside to that, obviously, because I want to create employment at the same time. But for some of the quick wins whilst I'm building the business, it's amazing. I mean, it is an amazing, amazing tool. I've got it on my phone. I've got it on my laptop. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
And it's a game changer because I think what always kind of people felt like this sort of level of comfort and, dare I say, complacency that humans, like even if people are striving for artificial general intelligence, the fact is that there's a gap, that human creativity cannot be replicated.
No, I completely agree.
But then ChatGPT came out and then we've seen like countless other tools, come out, and they have narrowed the gap. And we're seeing research papers and studies that are saying that are basically sort of showing that within not very long that human creativity will be superseded by machine creativity. You can now, I go to conferences where they have experts in like AI in the room, and they show people videos, they show people pictures, and none of us can confidently tell the difference between human created and machine created, and we've now got to that space. Like when you think about what it all looked like a year ago, it was kind of pretty obvious the differences, whereas within a year it's that gap is gone.
Well, I think the BBC, from memory, I can't remember the name of it, but it made a program about a politician who was actually kidnapped. I can't remember the name of the program. It was fiction, but I remember watching it at the time where he was kidnapped. He wasn't even around, and yet they were using everything he was saying and doing to totally change the voting of this particular politician. And actually he'd just been locked away in the room. He didn't even know what, and then suddenly he found out what was being said, and then he had to prove it wasn't him. And that, Dan Taylor-Watt recently came to something at the BBC with us, didn't he? And he said, and this is really, I think, as a parent, I got the most frightened when he asked how many of us actually have a password for our children. And although I did have a password for my child when she had to be collected from somewhere, because we did operate on that basis, and then I suddenly thought, what? And just thought, and then funnily enough, not only did he say that, where he said, do you have a password? Because their voice can be cloned into, is it less than 3 seconds?
3 seconds,
Clone from a social media post, they can clone a 3 second. What I then found, knowing that, then made a dinner party, and one of the ladies that come to my dinner party, one of my friends, she just said, oh, hang on, Georgia's phone's been stolen. I've got to deal with it. She needs a new phone. And I immediately said, oh, I bet you she hasn't lost her phone. Like, seriously, she hasn't lost her phone. You need to phone her. No, she just sent me a text. Don't click on anything, because that is that fakery in itself. And they could have possibly even found her voice, right, to do that. So it's a very, very difficult world that we're navigating in now. And certainly from a news perspective or trusted source of knowing, BBC Verify, for example, having to actually even tell you how they got the news, where they got the news, how they know that they got the news from trusted sources. It's quite frightening, the world that we're in. And you come at this from, I mean, I really want to pick up on the fact that you're coming on this podcast because you are very much looking at responsibility, right? Our responsibility to AI. So tell me a little bit more about what you mean by that.
Well, I think just going back to that point you just said about trust and not being able to sort of understand and all, BBC Verify. I think one thing that is sort of that is at the bottom of all of this is critical thinking.
Right.
I think for so long we just accept things.
Yeah.
We just get spoon-fed information, and critical thinking it's a key skill. It's the ability to look at something, to ask the questions, to assess what needs to be asked. Is this real? Is there a possibility that it's not real? Instead of just blindly sort of accepting everything. And then we take a lot on trust. And I think we're now sort of waking up that all of the avenues and all the sort of places that we go to, they don't necessarily sort of live up to our trust, and that we kind of need something sort of higher than that. But going back to kind of responsible use, I think at the BBC, what we kind of like to say is that, like, responsible use, it's about sort of minimizing the harms and maximizing the benefits of AI. That's kind of it in a nutshell, because it's like using it to its best ability, but making sure that any harms are, like, we mitigate them as much as we can. I mean, and that's also sort of making sure that our use of AI is aligned with our values. And it's also aligned with our there's also legal and regulatory obligations. There's things that we have to do, and that covers things like, data protection and things. But it is about sort of making sure that it lives up to our values, like as a society, as an organization at the BBC. And so give
our listeners an example of sort of some of the things that you're trying to implement as a result of those things that you talk about, because it's so important, isn't it?
So I think there's so many different aspects to AI, and I think it's important that sort of people kind of have a structure, a framework of how to actually use it in line with this. So what we have done at the BBC is that we've created a BBC AI policy about responsible use and how to use it responsibly. And we've got principles, we've got AI principles. And these are kind of like our North Star, our guiding light they underpin our use of AI.
And they would have had to have been produced. I mean, there's nothing to benchmark against. Is there for something like that? I mean, you're having to really think. It's all very well having a policy, right? Because I know there's a lot of people that love making policy, right? But to actually really think that through, that's a huge piece of work.
No, definitely. And I think there's lots of organizations that have got AI principles and stuff, but what we wanted to make them fit for the BBC, because I think the thing about the BBC, it's a unique organization. It's different to every other organization. So, for example, like, we've got 9 principles, and like we have like our BBC values are like our editorial values. Those are principles which other organizations wouldn't have. I mean, we have the ones that lots of other organizations have, like fairness, like making sure that our use of AI is fair, and that anyone that sort of is impacted by that use has equal opportunities, so that we don't discriminate with our use of AI. It's about respecting rights, that any sort of anything we use with AI, we respect the rights of the creators. It's about transparency and clear explanations, that we're transparent in our use, we're appropriately transparent in our use, and that we explain how we make decisions so that people understand what we're doing. And then we have things like human creativity, which is so key, because I think the BBC, we're we've got an important role in the creative industries in the UK, and human creativity is at the heart of how we're using AI to make sure that human creativity is at the heart of what we do, that we're not, that we don't lose sight of that, and also human oversight. At the end of the day, we need to make sure that humans are part of what we do, so that if we're using AI, it's not just as simple as just using AI. We need human oversight to check the AI.
How do you do that then? If you're somebody out there listening to this and you think, well, that all sounds fantastic, but how do you make human insights into this creativity and make sure that it's intertwined?
So we have specific processes, and we have specific things. Like if we're talking about human oversight, so for example, say you've got say you're using ChatGPT or something, and you basically asked it to summarize a report or something, we still have to follow. We have editorial standards,
right? Yeah,
we have guidelines, we have things that we do, we have processes. We have like, this has to be approved, that person has to have signed off. We have like editorial guidance on the use of AI, and it's like, and this is no different to anything else that we've done before. We still have to follow those same guidances. We still have to make sure that what we do is accurate. We still have to make sure that what we do is verified, that it's checked. Just because it's created by AI doesn't mean that we can just accept it.
Right.
Just say AI's done that.
Yeah.
If we're summarizing a document, we still need to make sure that if AI summarized it, that what it's summarized.
Because it's machine learning.
Yeah.
Right. So at the end of the day, it's only as good as whatever it's been told. So
it's only as good as whatever it's been told, but also it can like if you're using generative AI like ChatGPT, it can hallucinate. So it can confidently make up stuff, so it can confidently tell you that the sky is green or purple or pink, and you can ask it 4 times and it can give you 4 different answers.
Yeah, because I was told that in one of the conferences I went to with you, with this sense of that if you're really writing about a subject you don't know, research it first, because you might end up telling somebody something that's completely an untruth.
Yeah, completely. Check, verify. I mean, I remember I was sitting there, I can't even remember, I was watching a football game or something, and I was sitting there going, oh, wait a minute, how many teams were, I can't remember, I think, who's never been demoted from the top league of football. So I just checked with ChatGPT, and it gave me like 5 teams. And I was just like, well, I definitely know that 3 of those teams have been. And then I said, are you sure? And it went, yes. And I said, are you definitely sure? And it said, yes. And I said, well, I've just Googled it, and it's only this one team, Everton. And then it was like, oh yes, sorry, I'm wrong. And I was just like, why are you wrong? And it went, well, I am a machine, I am this, and so I just work on probability. So,
but that's so worrying and dangerous, isn't it? Really, I mean, it's fine if it's about whether an ice cream's pink or green or whatever, But if you think about, conspiracy theories, we saw a lot of that in the fallout of COVID. Was vaccinate, not vaccinate? What would happen to you if you got vaccinated? And I'm not here to discuss the rights and wrongs of that, but I know that I had actually members of my family who will still tell me all the, that almost like the world is not round. It's so, and I think the younger generation that rely on, and I think again, I don't know if the statistics are still true, and you might correct me, Petra, but something like nobody consumes more than 15 minutes of content. Therefore, they're taking such small bites of whether it's on TikTok or anything else right now that they just hear a soundbite and then completely out of context. And we've seen lots of ramifications, haven't we, unfortunately, where things have been taken out of context. But yet so many people believe it.
But the thing is, I think that the thing about all of like this stuff is that when it spits stuff out, it's basing it on probability, like of what the answer will be, like what the next word is in a sentence will be.
Right.
And it's trained on the internet. It's trained on data, and depending on what tool it is, we don't, and lots of these sort of tools don't tell us what they're actually trained on. They don't tell us which areas of the internet that they've ignored or which areas that they've only done. So we don't know what the bias is in the training data. So for example, it could just be all North American data. The rest of the world doesn't
Yes,
hear.
and we've seen that through news channels in itself.
Exactly.
I mean, that's,
if
you listen to one, I mean, there was an interesting program not so long ago that was absolutely showing you, and this is way before we got into the conversation on AI, that depending on what television channel you watched, depending on your leaning, you would be totally swayed through headlines of the newspaper or news media, whether it was Fox versus the BBC or CNN or anything. And I'm not saying which one it was, but certain news channels would absolutely sway you the wrong way deliberately, and probably being paid for by that political party to make sure they got the votes. So that's way before AI. So it's even more dangerous.
Yeah,
right?
Disinformation is huge. I mean, what was it? Last week I was just looking, and then you had in the US election, you had Donald Trump posted a picture of Taylor Swift promoting him, and it's like, well, that clearly doesn't, it's like I think it was Taylor Swift. No, it wasn't Taylor Swift. It was Taylor Swift. It was a T-shirt with Taylor Swift promoting Donald Trump as president.
Right.
And it's just like, and that's like a presidential candidate posting that. And it's completely
dangerous.
It's totally false.
Yeah.
And so it's like you can. So half of his viewers and her fan group is bigger than is enough to change the election. Yeah. And her fans are rabid. They're very devoted. So,
and they're young. And they're the ones that are not understanding the work of trusted media. Right? So even more worrying, I suppose, if you look at it through those lenses.
Well, it's interesting because I actually, looking at sort of use, I think younger people, even though they've grown up with AI, they're more skeptical about it than older. I think the most skeptical age group, in some studies, are like 25 to 34-year-olds, because they don't trust its benefits. They don't trust it works in a way that older age groups might not have thought about. So it's, there's different sort of issues in trust depending on sort of how you've used it, how you've grown up with it. And it's also, I think they've found that if you know about AI but you haven't used it, if you know about a tool and haven't used it, you're more anxious about it.
Yes.
Than if you have used it, and if you know about a tool and have used it, or you don't know about it at all, your anxiety levels are the same.
Yeah. Although it can be extremely advantageous and powerful. I had a mother tell me the other day that her daughter was, an incredibly clever child, a female, as it so happens, and she was trying to, one of the exercises from her degree was to take a picture, and she wants to go and work for NASA, so you can imagine the photographs they were talking about, right? And it said, tell us what you see in this picture and explain this photograph and whatever. And she came home and she's really super bright, and she just said to her, I don't know. How do I even explain this? I don't understand what they really want me to explain. So she uploaded, the mother, she was very proud of herself, actually. She uploaded the picture to ChatGPT and asked the same questions that were being asked for by the university, just to see what it would. And it basically then explained the entire picture in a way that obviously right. So she went back to her daughter and said, oh, I think I've worked it out, which obviously she hadn't, but that was And then, ironically, I was having a similar conversation with my daughter, who's studying to be a teacher, and she was saying, I failed on this one question, which was trying to describe the photo. I don't really understand what they were looking for. And I said, funny enough, I think I might be able to help you. And she said, and, she's young, but she said, I would have never have thought in a million years, by asking that question and putting in the picture, that would help me.
Yeah.
Not saying that she would take everything that was written, of course, and she'd need to think about it in the context of her own words. But to really support the learning as well, and choosing it in such a interesting way, again, to me, just showed the power of where it does good. I know, because I've worked with you, how important it was for us to set the culture and to get the culture right with our AI. And that was because we had totally different audiences, right? And we were looking at, someone like me in the back office versus, whether it's Sophie Rayworth or any other reporter or young journo running around the newsroom about what they could and what they couldn't use. And you've been quite, at the BBC, you've been quite clear about what I could use versus someone like a journo in the newsroom, haven't you? Because of the fact that you have to keep to the values, you have to be trusted,
Yep.
and you have to have integrity with everything that you're doing. It has to be a trusted source. How hard has that been?
It's extremely hard. I think probably the hardest thing is that there's no definite answer. And that's really hard, because I think the thing about this whole field is it's moving so quickly.
Yeah.
And everyone is still trying to work out what is allowed and what's off limits. I mean, there are so many lawsuits around the world going on in like so many different areas in like of AI sort of law that, there is no definitive position on anything really. And so even if somebody comes with the simplest thing they want to do, our answer is always, it depends. It depends on all the different sort of, parts of what it is you want to do.
And actually, when we look at change, which again, given this podcast is voices on the edge of change, and you are definitely, my God, one of those voices on the edge of change. Certainly over the few podcasts that we've been recording recently, we look at this sort of sense of, I think when I grew up in change, more or less a lot of the stuff had been done somewhere before, right? So there were lessons, and you could go, if I give you an example in its simplest form of building the West One building for the BBC, The Guardian had just moved. They had closed X buildings down to one. They were able to tell us some of the real basic things that we would need to know in moving 5 buildings down to one for the BBC. And interestingly, the one thing that we needed to pay attention to, we hadn't even imagined, they told us, and hey presto, we got that right. Okay. But that in itself is something that had been done before, tried and tested. There were lessons. As I grew up in change, there were other lessons where I was told I wanted to do, we wanted to do 18 scheduling systems into one. We went to all the people that we thought should have 18 scheduling systems nailed into one. They hadn't. When we actually came back and said it hasn't been done before, there was still a view, rightly or wrongly, there's still a view, well, we'll still do it, we'll be fine. And guess what? We weren't. But the point is now, we even had that lesson that we knew that we wouldn't be right. Whether we listened to it and adhere to it's a whole other story, but we knew. Now we're in a world where actually, we don't know. Yeah. We really don't know. Yeah. And that's got to be exciting, but also incredibly scary to be in a role so prominent as yours at looking at what is responsibility around AI.
Yeah, I think it is exciting because the opportunities are endless, but I think it's the big thing about this role is you have to be comfortable with uncertainty. That's the key thing, and I think a lot of people aren't.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And it's just, and sometimes it can be really frustrating that there are no clear answers. Everything has to be a discussion, has to be thought about, has to be a conversation, has to be thought through, and that we may not even get to. We just get to good enough or good enough for now, but that's the position today. But we know that we're going to have to change the position in 3 months or 6 months or 9 months. So it's just constant change and constant uncertainty, and that
And how much backing or how far do you think the BBC are with being uncomfortable about that uncertainty? Because that's a very, from my knowledge of the Beeb in my time there, that's a big ask to be that uncomfortable with risk.
I think it's an interesting thing. I think that the BBC is not short of people that like to have conversations about everything. So, or just think and let's discuss it. But I think the issue is we still kind of need to put a structure around that. And that I think that's a challenge. And I think a lot of people want to just come to you and they want answers.
Yes.
They just want answers. What do I do in this situation? Yeah. Yeah. What do I do? Can I do this? Can I do that? And a lot of times you're just like, we haven't thought about that yet, because we've got like 100 100 things like similar that we need to think about. So maybe we haven't thought about that permutation. So we now need to have a conversation about that, but they need it now. They need it today. They're going on air tomorrow, and so it's constantly, trying to, work ahead and think of some of this stuff and put in the sort of frameworks to be able to react to these. But then also, if people are coming, like trying to give people what they need in the time.
So how much scenario building do you get to do, or you don't? It's really live scenario building. It's sort of, we're here, somebody's presented us with this.
There's quite a lot of the live stuff, Right. I think, again, when BBC, the resources aren't huge, we don't have a huge team. So, that whole looking ahead, that's a luxury. This may happen, so let's put in what we would do in that case. We've got enough of what is happening to sort of to work on.
Okay. Gosh, I mean, there's so much to unpack here. And it's almost like, it reminds me a tiny bit, even though it is slightly different, when I was head of internal comms at the B, because I remember thinking I'm going to wake up to a crisis every morning. And I did. By the way, I was always defending communications, never being proactive. And it does feel to me like it's one of those jobs, because you genuinely never know when you wake up what you're waking up to.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Yeah, there's always a different, people, it's good because a lot more people are coming and wanting to use AI and know that, that where there's a team that they can ask for advice and everything like that. And so we're hearing some really interesting things coming through. And every day there's something different. And no two things are exactly the same.
And do you publish your learnings? Because one of the things that we were going to discuss when we had our preamble was that sort of sense of where the rest of the world is, where other companies are, where are they being sustainable potentially on AI? And that's, people might be thinking, what am I talking about? Why are you using the word sustainability in an AI? Because when people think about sustainability, they think about something you throw away or that we want to be greener in something. So where does that come in? And how do you think your work and other work of other organizations are coming together on AI?
Well, think about publishing our learnings. We're still we've been using AI for years, and we have published with what we've done with AI, but in the generative AI space, right. We have various pilots happening at the BBC, and we've gone out publicly and talked about that earlier this year and late last year. Like Roger Taufan-Davis, Director of Nations, he's the executive sponsor for generative AI, and he's sort of done a couple of blog posts and about what we're doing in this space. But those pilots are currently underway, right? And I'm assuming that there'll be some sort of communication as to what comes out of that. But with most of the stuff that we've done, we're still early days. It's only now at the moment I'm currently sort of supporting with the rollout of the very first sort of generative AI tool that is authorized for all BBC use. So we're rolling that out across the organization across the rest of the year. And that's the first sort of generative AI tool that goes across the BBC. We've got some that are in pilot or some teams can use, but this is the first pan BBC. So it's still new that the BBC is, because we've spent a lot of time putting in place sort of structures, understanding use, putting, and
a lot of training, because I was part of that with you, and a huge, we shouldn't underestimate the training program and the education program that you pulled together with a few other people.
That's led by the BBC Academy, and who've just been amazing on all of this. And basically they've put together this sort of training program. And I think the heart of all of this, the thing about AI is a lot of people think of AI as a nebulous concept, and it's like a bit like a big brother. They don't know how far it seeps in, but it's everywhere. And the thing that is so important to that whole culture piece is education. People need to understand what AI is. They need to understand what they can do with it, what the risks are, what the opportunities are, how it can be used. Things like, implications of use. So it's all of that and it's also raising the awareness that, this is even a thing.
Yeah, and I suspect with your policies, and maybe you haven't gone this far yet, but it's going to have to come into that whole code of conduct, right?
Well, yeah, our policy basically says that the use is, code of conduct
right?
is under, the use is underlined by the code of conduct. So,
Because, I mean, that's something that you have to agree to as part of your employment contract now and coming in, right? Because it's so powerful and so dangerous.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I don't want to keep talking about dangers all the time, but that sort of sense of your responsibility for working for a media organization actually plays out to, you need to understand, i.e. the education, you need to bear the risk in anything that you decide to do and understand the implications. We talk about implications here, and actually think about responsibly, how can I use it? What are those 9 principles that you talk about? How do I make sure? And I would say this, wouldn't I? Because I've just spent years and years at the BBC worrying about their values, and every minute they're in the limelight. That sense of, is it trusted? Is it impartial? Am I going to do something that's ethically right? Will it be sustainable in whatever I decide to do? It's just so many lessons there, Petra, and a huge job for you.
It is. It's we've got a great team, and there's lots of partners across the organization. That's the thing about the BBC. So many people are interested in this space. They want to get involved. They want to help this. They want to develop this. One thing I always say about sort of responsible use is that sometimes responsible use of AI means no use of AI. I think that's because
don't do it.
Yeah, because sometimes, because you sort of mentioned sort of things like sustainability. You touched on that slightly earlier. And the thing is, with generative AI, just the sheer amount of computational power that's been used to power these sort of tools and models is huge. It's massive energy implications, like on energy use every time you basically hit anything. So sometimes, it's important to consider, why are we actually using this? What problem are you solving? Like if you're thinking from an organizational level, what problem are you solving? What value is this going to bring? Is it just doing it for the sake of doing it?
Mm-hmm.
Is it fear of missing out because everyone organization is doing it and you don't want to get left behind? At the BBC, we're the BBC. We've got a public service commitment. We have to think about, what is it? Just because you can doesn't mean you should.
No, and I can really relate to that because I don't know whether it's because I was working with you, but I didn't really, until I left the BBC, I didn't really play with anything to do with, knowingly, I didn't play with anything to do with AI. I didn't deliberately go and look for tools that might help me to do something, right? And then I realized when I left the BBC, and I've set up a few different companies, but Women in Change in particular, and then we're buying in VA support and things like that, and suddenly they go, we can't afford more than 10 hours a month. Suddenly you start to think, well, what else could help me? I'm just wondering, is there anything else? And then you start to see where there are, as you said, and I'm dyslexic. I've said this across my podcast. I'm a dyslexic thinker. So I've always been open to audiobooks that make it so much easier for me to digest, or learning how to speed read, or whatever it might be. So I see this as an enhancement of me being able to do my job well. What I don't see it as is taking me out of my job. Yeah. Right. Or I'd hope not anyway. Yeah. But I do, I have been talking to people about, and this is far wider than the BBC. Unfortunately, we don't have time for this podcast, but it's definitely one to invite you back for. But what I see and what I hear is the way people will do their roles differently. So you'll still be a surgeon. You could be the top open heart surgeon in the world. You'll still be needed, but you may not be in the operating theatre. You may be talking to a robot that's in the operating theatre that does something much neater now and a different way of getting into the heart than actually. But we still need your skill. We still need the human to work that out, right? But the roles and the jobs that are going to change and fall out of this is probably a whole other podcast.
Well, I think for the last 200 years since the Industrial Revolution, we've constantly seen that. We've seen how, basically industrial revolution put people into factories. Yes. And then and then people got taken out of factories with like computational power came, and then we became a service industry, especially in this country, and now AI is sort of changing things again. And what's always been the constant is that all the people that felt that jobs were going to disappear, they were wrong. Jobs disappeared, but employment still increased.
Yeah.
I think now with AI, we're potentially at a point where we don't know if that's still going to be the case, that the jobs may just disappear and that they don't
Well, I think there will be jobs that disappear because we're seeing it.
Yeah,
you know, Ocado, Tesco, they've got robots in their factories.
But we wouldn't have the job replacement that we've had over the last 200 years. So we may end up with fewer people in employment. But I think the thing for me that's so exciting about AI is that AI is giving us an opportunity to fundamentally rethink what we want as a society, what our value is as humans, what is work, what should work be, what should society be, what do we want it to be, and a lot of those sort of bigger questions AI is forcing us to confront, which I think for some people is scary, but it's an opportunity for us to rethink our society. And for example, work, if, potentially there may be fewer jobs, but then what jobs exist and what do we do about the fact that there's not many people in work? I know that in the EU, they're having conversations about universal basic income, because this is...
No, I know. I mean,
yeah.
Really want to invite you back for that conversation, let me tell you, because this thought that people will actually get paid not to work and to have some sort of universal income and to work or to have creativity in a different way.
Exactly.
I mean, that's to me, really...
I've been so interested in that for the last few years, and I feel like AI is going to accelerate that.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more.
I think it's exciting, potentially that people could, be given something and really think about what is it they want without having to, AI could free up those opportunities for them.
So maybe Simon Sinek, and I may have got this wrong, but I think it was Simon Sinek that has been saying this recently, where he talks about the fact that certainly my generation, I'm a lot older, we were brought up to believe that you work for 40 or 50 years, you buy a house, right? Your house hopefully becomes part of your pension, and that you pay into a pension. So you generally work for one or two companies your whole life, and you leave with a healthy goodbye. And then hopefully one day you don't spend it all because you're going to die quite young, because that's what's generally happened, and you give your legacy to your children. Honestly, that is sort of the belief in what my generation were brought up to believe. And depending on where you came from, you also, some generations believe that you just marry well enough that you wouldn't even have to work. That said, right, that's not, now what I'm hearing and what Simon Sinek had said to me the other day, what I found very interesting was I did take a gap year. In fact, I took 2 years in a row, and that was my gap year in my 20s, right? And I'm really pleased I did it. It taught me a lot about community, taught me a huge amount of things, taught me culture, community, sharing, tons of stuff. But what he said and what got me was this sense of, oh, you're going to employ me, Petra. Yeah, you know what? I'll come work for you for I'll give you 18 months because I'm going to go around the world for a year. And in fact, you know what? Actually, I'm going to take 2 or 3 years off. I might come back and work for you after that. Or I might not.
Yep.
It's a whole different level of choice.
Yeah.
And you're waving your hand at me for those of you who can't see, because I think you're thinking you're going on a sabbatical, are you, Petra, after this podcast?
Yeah, I love it. I love that.
Right?
I love that opportunity, that choice, that knowing what's out there. And I think that's what I feel like AI has done. And like this technology revolution is democratized choice.
Yeah.
It's given people access to opportunities, to information about opportunities they just would never have had before this.
Yeah. Fascinating.
And to me, that's exciting.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to end it there with everybody thinking about how they're now going to resign from their jobs and go around the world and think about a whole different life. Can I thank you seriously for what has been nearly an hour of a conversation? I don't know how long this will be edited down to, but seriously, a really fascinating conversation. I could just continue on and on.
Yes, so can I.
It's a pleasure. It's always a pleasure. I loved working with you. I hope we will do more work in the future, but thank you for believing in women in change. Thank you for being one of the voices on the edge of change. And I can't wait to see what you're going to do next. So I might have to come and meet you in Australia or somewhere else, I think. But thank you very much, Petra.
No, thanks, Lou. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. I was really struck by a lot of things that Petra said. A few things in particular. One, that throughout all the episodes of our podcast, we hear about people's squiggly careers. There hasn't been a single roadmap, a single one way of doing something to get to anywhere that any of our change voices and our leaders that we've interviewed on this podcast have got to. On this one in particular, the rise of the adoption rates that Petra spoke about. Wow. I don't think we've ever seen such a fast adoption in any change, and particularly in tech, where most people are fearful. The 9 principles and policies that she's had to think about around the editorial values, the values of the BBC, being fair, respecting others, the rights around AI, transparency of use. I was also really struck by verify, verify, verify. Don't just assume because you get something back that it's right. Really understand how it's going to help you. How it has some bias, the data bias, the machine learning, the safety element. The safety is probably not such a surprise because we all know how difficult social media is, and this just lays another level of complexity on top. But for me, it was really about the fast-paced change, the level of adoption, how uncomfortable we have to be, particularly around uncertainty, the speed of the change, and the things that will really help you. My takeaways on the things that will really help you were education, education, education. Really be clear about the risk. Really understand how it can be used. Really understand the consequences of the implications of how you use that. And lastly, well, there were 2 things really. Being uncomfortable with uncertainty and reimagining a whole other society that we're about to become. What are you thinking?
This episode was sponsored by Change Story. All our podcasts are made by changestory.co.uk. If you want to make your own podcast or know more, why not get in touch?